city, and they had an image of him from some distance. He was a tall fella, tall, I guess, in relationship to the crowd that was around him, 6'2". And he was a head taller than everyone else. Might have been a camera angle, might have been an actual, whatever it was. And as I was looking at the scene, I remember thinking to myself, in the massive humanity, he stood out. And as I was thinking about that, in relationship, did he ever become lonely in that kind of setting? Or perhaps you can think of something like this. Maybe you are in the midst of humanity being a small crowd, we'll just use the term midst of humanity, and you feel all by yourself and you wonder, does anybody like me? Is anybody paying attention to me? Maybe these are thoughts that never go through your mind, and maybe they do on a regular basis. But as you think about that, turn with me to Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. And I was thinking about this with regard to the one who was demon-possessed living in the tombs or in the midst of those who had gone on to their reward as a result of the life that they have lived. And here was this lonely man who was actually ostracized by the community, and it seems to be for a good reason. He was demon-possessed. And he was not going to allow himself to be contained by anybody. But yet there must have been something with regard to him that had a form of constraint, because he would not go outside of that environment and threaten other people, at least as far as their record is concerned. And then he sees Jesus. And this is where we will begin our reading in Mark chapter 5. Start with me in verse 1. It's a lengthy reading, but I'm going to beg your indulgence that you will read along with me in order that we might have a sense of what is being said. Down through verse 20. Reads this way. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, unto the country of the Gadarenes. Now, some of your translations will read a little bit differently. Here, Gerasenes, for instance. What you will essentially have is the Gadarenes being a larger territory, and Gergesenes or Gerasenes being something of a smaller territory within that larger territory. Verse 2. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou tormentest me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send him, or rather send them away out of the country. Now there was nigh unto the mountain a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave, and the unclean spirits went out, and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. And they that had fed the swine fled, and told it in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what it was that was done. And they came to Jesus, and see him, and was possessed. Let me try that again, verse 15. And they come to Jesus, and see him that was possessed with the devil, and had the legion, sitting and clothed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And they that saw it told them how it befell him, that he who was possessed with the devil, also concerning the swine. And they began to pray to him to depart from their coast. And when he was come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not. but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed, and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. Thank you for following along with me in that reading. But there are four primary points here from this text that I think we can glean when you think about whether somebody is lonely in the midst of a crowd, whether somebody is paying attention to them, they feel ostracized because they're actually not being paid attention to, not given any attention at all. And as you think about verses 1 through 20, take note of the despair here in verses 1 down through verse 5. Look at verse 2 in particular. Here you have somebody dwelling in the tombs. Now, when you think about that, think about it along this line. Halloween is not a biblical holiday at all, and you all, and I do say you all, know that. It has no religious connotation in a positive sort of way, but it's negative in all respects. But will you camp out in a cemetery during that time of the night? Well, for some of you, that's non-issue. You can camp out there or you can camp out somewhere else. But for others of you, no chance will I be out there. Well, why? Well, it's because of the association with those who are dead, and maybe something will happen. And you don't know what it will be. You may not even think there will it be anything, but you're not going to give yourself an opportunity to be scared by that. But here was a man who was living in the tombs. And as he would try to do whatever it was that he was doing, you'll take note right there in verse 3 that no one could contain him. And so they essentially ostracized him and said, you're going to go out there and you're not going to come our way at all. Now, could he have overpowered them and gone the way of those of the community? Perhaps he could have. Or maybe he could not at all by the sheer number of men who were stood up to defend the community. Whatever it was, you'll take note right there in verse 3. And when he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains. Now, I'm not a very strong man, but there was one day when I was pretty strong, and the idea of breaking a chain, no chance that was ever going to happen. But this one was not going to be contained by chains at all. And neither, as you take note there in verse 4, was there going to be anything that was going to tie him, but rather he would bring attention to himself. Look at verse 4 all over again. Because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man contain him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. Now, I have come to understand, really of late, that there is a behavior that some young people are involved in with that use of the word cutting. I don't have any good words to say about that. But as you think about the application of that word in any kind of context, that's somebody crying out. Now, as you look there in verse 5, and always night and day, he was in the mountain and in the tombs crying and cutting himself with stones. He was wanting attention. Note the despair right here. And when you take note of those who are in despair, what is it that you do? Well, some will actually go and try to reach out and see if they can make a difference. Others, they don't know how to respond, so they back away because they just simply don't know how to respond. And as you look there in verse 5, there was one who did respond. And you know who that was in verses 6 and following. Jesus. Note this with me in verse 6. And when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshiped him. Some of your translations will say he ran and bowed down before him. That's the idea. And clearly, the King James, with the word worship, you can see that there's a proper application with that, because when you see somebody who is greater than you, you defer to them in all respects. And here, this one who was controlled by demons certainly saw somebody who was greater than him. And so what did he do? He deferred to him, and in fact, he went and bowed down before him. He clearly recognized who Jesus was, and you can see that in the very next verse, because Jesus was on the verge of delivering this man. And note this with me in verse 7. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God, thou torment me not. Now this man, possessed by demons, something greater than himself, the demons residing in this man recognized that Jesus could accomplish that which they appealed to him not to pursue. Jesus could accomplish that. Don't torment me. Even though I'm tormenting this man, even though we're tormenting this man, don't torment us. What have I to do with thee? In other words, we are not associated at all. Why do you want to come and infringe upon my environment? Well, Jesus could have said easily enough, it's because you're infringing upon somebody else's environment, and you need to be addressed. But you'll note right there in verse 7, 6, and following, the deliverance of Jesus, and there in verse 8, come out of that man, thou unclean spirit. Look at the brevity of those words. Jesus says to this man who was living in the tombs, who was controlled by demons, come out. Perhaps he said it with force. Perhaps he said it softly. Come out, thou unclean spirit. And with a word, it occurs. Boy, wouldn't it be great if we could have a solution like that in all areas of our life? Wouldn't it be great if somebody could just simply say, it's done, and it's done? I remember the movie that is, of course, as you're aware, not accurate at all with regard to the biblical record, and that would be the Ten Commandments. And not Charlton Heston, but Yul Brynner, who played Pharaoh, would say, so let it be written, so let it be done. Wouldn't it be so nice for something like that to be the case? Well, somebody in position of authority might be able to make it the case, and Jesus was in position of authority, and he could make it the case. And you'll note right there in verse 9, and he asked him, what is thy name? And he answered and said unto him, my name is Legion. That simply conveys to you the sheer volume of demons that was in this one who was being controlled by them. And it's no wonder that there was nothing that can control him in the community. No one, no thing. And you'll note right there when he saw Jesus, you'll take note of why they responded to him, because no one could control Jesus. But Jesus could control all. So you'll note the deliverance right here in verses 6 and following. Come out of this man, thou unclean spirit. Well, you take note of that, and you see the despair and the deliverance, but you also take note in verses 14 through 17, the dismay. Not only was this one who was possessed dismayed that they were now thrust out, but the community was dismayed as well, because they didn't understand. They did not understand what was going on. Here you have this demon-possessed man who was in control of his environment, not going to allow anybody to control him, and then suddenly somebody comes over here, and with a word he is cleaned, he is healed. Note this with me in verses 14 and through 17 all over again. And they that fed the swine fled. Now think about that. There were to be no livestock with the Jewish community that was associated with swine or pigs or hogs. And they that fed the swine fled and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And they come to Jesus, see him that was possessed with the devil, and the legion, now note this, sitting, that is, he's docile, clothed, fully clothed, evidently he was not previously, and in his right mind, which clearly means that at one previous time he was not in his right mind. He was deranged. He was delusional. He was certainly discouraged. That you note there in verse 15, once again. And they come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the devil and had the legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And you can well imagine why they were. Who are you that you could come in here? Now they were saying that with utter amazement. Who are you that you could come in here and suddenly heal this man that none of us can control? Note this with me in verse 16. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coast. In other words, Jesus comes in, he heals this man who is possessed with many demons, and they don't know if but that Jesus would come and perhaps supplant this man and do far worse things. It may have been that they saw the good that he had done, but they were frightened because they didn't understand where that would go, and 2,000 head had rushed down into the steep and drowned, which to tell you one thing, if it tells you nothing at all, one soul is worth however many animals one might have in their possession. Livestock, I remember years ago, little aside, I remember years ago, I was told that one person, and I know who the one person is, I could call her by name, and I won't though, lest she hear this sermon, but I just identified her. Oh well, in any case. She said it's worth a child's loss to save a Bengal tiger. Think about that. It's worth the loss of a child to save a Bengal tiger if it's on the verge of extinction. Now, does she think, this was 25 years ago, does she think that anymore? God forbid if she does. But she has gone in that direction with her ideology. Jesus valued the soul of one person above anything associated with livestock, above anything associated with the animal kingdom. One soul. One soul. And you'll note right there in verse 17, and they began to pray to him, depart, and they were dismayed. But as you think about the despair, the deliverance, and the dismayed response, you'll note right here in verses 18 through 20, the desire. There was one man who was redeemed, who was saved, who was healed, who wanted to be with Jesus. And it reads this way in verses 18 and following. And when he had come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but said unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men marveled. Now look at verses 18 and 19 and note two primary things. Number one, not only do you have somebody who was healed, but you also have Jesus giving him a task. Go and tell other people about what had taken place. I understand your desire to be with me. I respect your heart and where it is at this point in time, but you know you can do a great deal of good when you go and tell other people about your own experience in life and who it was that healed you of this infirmity, spiritual infirmity, that was controlling you. Think about what it is that you can do. Note this with me in verse 18, and the desire of the one who was healed. And when he was coming to his ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him, appealed to him strongly that he might be with him. And why would he not want to be with Jesus? And Jesus said, Go home and tell thy friends and tell the great things that the Lord hath done for you. Now look at that word Lord. Now as you look at that word Lord in verse 19, to those of the Jewish community, that referred to the Almighty. That referred to God, who we know to be God the Father. Now look at this in verse 20, the second point. And he departed and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done. So what Jesus had done was teach this man, let them know what the Lord had done, and this man interpreted that to be Jesus. Jesus is both Lord and Christ. He is the one that there were those in the community of the Jews rejected, but there was one man who accepted him. There were more than one, but there was one man who accepted him because of the impact that Jesus made in his life. So you're walking down New York City, Gallipolis, Rio Grande, wherever it is, and you're in the midst of people and you feel all by yourself. Nobody likes me. But actually there is one. He is ostracized, but he's not ostracized. There's one looking out for him. And what kind of impact can you make? What kind of impact can somebody make when someone takes an interest? And Jesus took an interest. Go and tell what Jesus had done for you. That's a mission that you have. Go and tell what Jesus had done for you and how he's changed your life. Has he changed your life? Well, if you are a child of God, the answer is to be a strong yes. But if he's not changed your life, you are the one that this lesson is designed to penetrate, to get to. You need to live a changed life. You need to let that life reflect the life of Christ. If you're not a Christian, you need to become one. You need to become one this morning, but only if you desire to. For if you simply compel yourself to do something you have no desire to do, you will have done nothing. But if you have a desire to obey the Lord Jesus Christ, he will receive you, and one life will be changed.